rain showers turning cooler with shifting and gusty winds was the forecast for the day for Murfreesboro.
Wow.
Most people only knew something was happening when debris started hitting the windows or coming through the windows, or they saw the dark clouds.
Next month, Southern Illinois will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Tri-State Tornado. The deadliest tornado event in U.S. history. Almost 700 people died on March 18, 1925. Over the 100 years since then, the area has been shaped by other significant weather events, including the December 10, 2021 tornadoes that ripped through western Kentucky. These remarkable events have reshaped a part of the country already defined by extreme weather. Tracking the impact of those storms on the crossroads of America, meteorologist Jennifer Rukavina. You might know her from her years on the air at WPSD Local 6. You might also know her from the flower shop she owns in Paducah. This week on the Crossroads Suncast, she sits down with WPSD anchor Jennifer Horbelt to discuss her upcoming television special, A Century of Storms. What we can learn from our past, and how changes in technology are helping meteorologists prepare for the future. I'm Bryce Patterson. Here's Jennifer Rukavina.
A lot of meteorologists will tell you that is how their first inkling that they had an interest in it was out of their fear of thunderstorms. And I can remember, and my mom tells the story, and I don't know if I've told you this story, but I remember being held by my mother in front of a big glass window we had in our home. And lightning hit, you know how it does often, very close by to where it's the immediate sound of thunder. And from then on, I was terrified because I didn't know very small, probably younger than 4 years old. I was, my mom was holding me, we were watching it rain. And so that was sort of the way into the fear of thunderstorms. But then, as I probably annoyed my parents so much, Mom thought, why don't we get you some books so you better understand? Because back then they didn't know what to tell you, the dynamics of thunderstorms and things like that. And honestly, looking back, there wasn't much back then. It was a lot of picture books and sort of the clashing of air mass and things like that. And it was real basic, but at least gave me the sense of security, thinking I could understand it better, so I wasn't as afraid.
Yes. Now that we're both moms, I know my son, and because you've talked with him, he's so interested in storms, but he is scared by them. But I have found, like, the more that he has learned about them, it has given him a confidence of the ability to explain what's happening, has made him feel more secure and not being scared.
I wish I could recall the technical term, because there really is a phobia that is associated with thunderstorms and lightning. And I think my fear is more of the lightning than it is the actual thunderstorm. And that's probably what most people, because you can't predict it. And so that's the unknown. I think as a kid, I was always terrified a tornado would happen, which is completely rare in Northeast Ohio for a tornado to ever happen. But it was like the unknown and the unpredictability of it. And I think that's where most kids and some adults that don't understand, maybe don't have access to understanding or the knowledge of what thunderstorms are and how rare severe and tornadic storms are.
I feel like one of the things I've always really respected about you, and one of the things that has made me really like you and love you even more, is that you have really taken your own personal experience and have made it a point of not just informing people, but also you're not just telling people what's happening right now. You're supplying them with the knowledge. You do a lot of teaching so that they also have that confidence in what's taking place. They're still looking to you as the expert, but they know more and feel less scared because of it.
Well, you got to give people tools to be able to tell their children confidently why they shouldn't be scared, or tell children, what you can do to help in a situation, and arms them with responsibility in the family. And that helps them be less scared. And so it's all of those things. Just, I consider myself to be a good communicator. So that's why that's important to me, is that use that gift of communicating to relate those things as it relates to weather and meteorology. And, it just seeing kids enjoy the weather and track the weather like your son, and that gives me joy.
Yeah.
Because they can connect with it, in which all of us can connect with it because it's part of our daily lives.
Yeah, it affects all of us.
Yeah.
No matter where you come from, no matter what you do, no matter what you look like, the weather affects you every single day. That really brings me to this special.
Okay.
Because I feel like this special is not just something to, put out there to document, what took place. I feel like you're also using it as a way to educate people.
Yes, in a way of educating, but it's also, and let me touch on this first.
Yeah.
My doing this is something that I've wanted to do throughout my entire career. I've always wanted to do a historical perspective on our region because we learn so much from our history in every aspect of life. In weather, it's the only way we can prepare for what could be next. It's the only way to know how did my house make it through a storm or a flooding. It's because of this construction code or because of that. There's so many things to learn out of big events like that. And remembering the important parts of our history that got us to the technology we have today. This is sort of one of my last official acts working for WPSD is a love letter to the community.
This is emotional for you.
It is. And it's just because, you know, I invested my entire career here. Didn't go anywhere else. And
not just your career, your
right,
life,
my life,
your family,
my
everything.
family, everything. But it was always important to me, day one, to know the history of our area so I could better forecast and better prepare people. And so this is a way of, I guess, my final way of trying to give back through that knowledge that I have and sharing that with people and maybe allowing people to connect with the weather in a new way, and think about things as we go into the future of what seems to be, an endless cycle of extreme weather in our region. When you see this special, you'll see that we are no stranger to these massive events that change the landscape and our life. And so this is just one way of kind of collecting it all together for people to see.
Name of the special.
A Century of Storms.
Okay, so we're looking back 100 years.
Yes. And the reason for that is that we are coming up very quickly on the anniversary of the Tri-State tornado, which was March 18th, 1925. There's big commemoration taking place in southern Illinois because the majority of that track went through southern Illinois. And it, to this day, is the deadliest and longest track tornado in U.S. history. And it's something to look at because here we are 100 years later, almost 100 years later, and a long track, deadly tornado.
I know.
You just shift that track about 50 miles south, 60 miles south, and it's the same kind of disaster.
Yeah.
But guess what? 695 people didn't die. Very few people died compared to our technology and our warning system and lack of warning system 100 years ago. And to see the progression between those two storms is the point of this.
And specifically, you're talking about the December 2021 tornado.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, a storm of the same magnitude that was just shifted a bit south, 100 years later, there's a reason that there weren't hundreds and hundreds of deaths.
Right. Absolutely. We'll look at the role that radar plays in those changes. Communication is the number one. Back when the 1925 storm happened, there was radio, but it was mostly in big cities. So there wasn't even radio yet in most of these smaller towns in southern Illinois, southeast Missouri, and southwest Indiana. There was no way to tell people that anything was happening.
Didn't you say, too, that you weren't even allowed to say that back then?
That's one of the jumping off points is how are you supposed to let anyone know something bad's going to happen when you can't even say the word tornado in a forecast? It was not allowed in those. They would have little daily newspaper weather hints at what the day would be like. And I believe it was rain showers turning cooler with shifting and gusty winds was the forecast for the day for Murfreesboro.
Wow.
A great deal of Murfreesboro was completely
decimated.
gone. When you get into some of the smaller towns, DeSoto and some of the other areas in very rural southern Illinois,
Mm-hmm.
to this day, one of the schools in that path is still the biggest loss of life ever
Wow.
in U.S. history in a school, because most people only knew something was happening when debris started hitting the windows or coming through the windows, or they saw the dark clouds.
Mm.
It wasn't like,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get a social alert
No.
on our phone. We didn't get, even grandma calling saying, hey, is it really bad there? That's not happening because
They
just
couldn't.
didn't have communications back then.
Mhm.
So
Whereas with the December storm, I mean, we were watching that thing in
an
Arkansas.
hour, at least an
Yeah.
hour heads up
Yeah.
as that stuff was
Unreal.
coming out of Arkansas.
Mhm.
And you'll see by the Weather Service them talking about putting out unprecedented information just to Twitter. At the time was Twitter, where all they said was, you need to stay
Mhm.
alert to this storm. They didn't put graphics with it. They just made the statement, this is a storm we have to watch. Be prepared. And as it was coming out of Arkansas into Missouri and into Tennessee and across the boot heel there, I mean, the Weather
Yeah.
Service doesn't just do that.
No.
And it was
That's why everyone paid so close
right.
attention, because they understood that the
Sure.
National Weather Service was saying that for a very, very, very good reason.
Yeah. And I remember, so this may or may not make it into the end of the special, but, the days leading into that event, and I talked to some of the Storm Prediction Center people about this and how
Yeah.
well forecast it was, because it really was. There was several days notice that something big was possible, not likely, but possible. And I remember when you get into these severe weather events, there are certain parameters we go and look at
Mhm.
in the computer models.
Yeah.
If a lot of them are showing those parameters, that's kind of a good signal that things are lining up. It's not a certainty, but you start really paying attention
Mhm.
to where. Well, I remember one of the models was showing what are helicity tracks, and that basically is showing where a storm is rotating
Mhm.
for long periods of time. It'll show you how long. And Trent and I had been texting that day, the day before, like, did you see that one long track across?
Mhm.
It actually came through Paducah, was
Whoa.
where the model put it,
Yeah.
through the Paducah area. But it showed that
Yeah.
almost quad state length. So the computer model the day before picked up on this long track supercell, but only by 20 miles difference. That is incredible technology.
That actually really,
Didn't it give you goosebumps?
it does give me goosebumps.
That's just
Yeah.
insane that
Mhm.
we have that technology. It's being able to harness it, understand it, apply it, but also realize that nothing could have happened that day.
Yeah.
There's nothing certain about the weather. And so, but those are the red flags that we get as meteorologists when we see things like that. And that's why you'll see the potential for long-lived tornadoes, large tornadoes, long-track tornadoes in forecast discussions, or when we say that, that's because
Mhm.
we've seen those signals.
Mhm.
And that was happening leading into that event. But that just blaringly stood out to me that one computer model had that going across Paducah. And that scared me,
Yeah.
because I've always been scared that
Of that,
Paducah's going to take a
absolutely.
direct hit from a big
Yeah.
tornado like that. Little did we know it was going to be Mayfield, but we knew somewhere there was going to be
There's going to be
some bad weather. Yeah.
some very bad weather. These storms that you have looked at over the last 100 years, that you've been looking at here recently for this special, but throughout your life, because you've been studying weather. It's not like this is, the first time you've ever looked at these storms and the details about
Right.
these storms. But looking at those and experiencing those and covering them, how has that shaped your life?
I think each event is different.
Mm-hmm.
Just like each of our children is different.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny you asked me that, because I asked some of the scientists the same thing,
Yeah.
not realizing that was the answer, is that they're all different.
Yeah.
Um, but I look back on one of the first ones I've covered was the big snowstorm of 2004, right after I got here.
I
And it was
remember you telling me lots of stories about this
22 inches
storm.
of snow, shut down the
Woo.
interstate. I was out, I was just a weekend meteorologist. I was sitting out at the gas station with a photographer for many, many hours as the snow is piling up. But that was when the Shell station was right across the street from
Yes.
Lourdes. And we had the big truck sitting out there,
Yeah.
like a
Oh,
little
yeah.
truck, and
The old live van.
just kept piling up, and they just wanted me out there all day to show updates, because that was our live capability back then. We had Facebook Live. That was the only way to do half-hour updates every hour.
Yeah.
Out
And
there at the
people really
gas
depended
station.
on that.
Yeah, they didn't have really another way. So that was, man, what did I get myself into moving here? Because I thought I was in the South, and then didn't realize that, big
You're a
bad
little in the
snowstorm.
north and a
Yeah.
little in the south. You
Yeah.
kind of get I guess, would you say the best of both worlds? The
Yeah.
best of both worlds
You don't
and
have a
the
long
worst.
winter. That's the best part.
That's true.
But
Very true.
thinking about that one, my first chase was the 2005 event that hit Big Bear and Marshall County. I was out chasing that day. And then probably fast forward to the late 2000s was back to back to back was Hurricane Ike,
Yep. Oh,
Winter
yeah.
Storm '09, and then the super derecho. All three very different events. And you'll know this, the Winter Storm '09 was just, that probably will always take
the number
one spot of impact.
Yeah.
Widespread impact. And
long-term impact.
One of the only times I felt terrified.
Yeah.
Even being here at the station.
Yeah.
I was terrified of how we were going to survive it, because it was just kept getting worse.
I know.
And worse and worse.
And you couldn't get out, and there was nowhere to
Yes.
get gas. And I remember, you talked about how, you and Trent, before the tornado, the day before, there were these models that had all come together and kind of showing that this was there was a good likelihood that this tornado was going to happen over a long, period. But I remember the 2009 winter storm, in like the day and the morning leading up to it, that all of you and the models, I mean, you all were saying this is going to be catastrophic.
Yeah.
I think was the word that John Champion used in the morning meeting. And it's not every weather event that there's so much agreement.
Never said that.
Not just from computer models, but also meteorologists, because you guys ultimately do have a little bit of a different interpretation sometimes of things, and you come together, and just like with the computer models, you find a path forward that is the best compromise and makes the most sense. But there have been a few events, like I feel like the December event and the winter storm event, that it was just like, oh no, this is going to happen.
And then to add to that, in between then, another one that will last with me is the flood of 2011. Just because it's important to me to learn the history of this place. And so one of the first things you learn about is the Great Flood. When you see it happen again, you're like, man, like, you just can't imagine what it was like without that flood wall. In all of these towns, what it would be like without that flood wall, because it was bad.
Yeah.
And it was, the blowing of Bird's Point Levee. That was just nothing you would ever consider.
Yes.
You're like, that's an old wives' tale. No, we did it. And then it was only 5 years later, 2016, they considered doing it again, because another historic event was taking place in the same region. And it's because we live in an area where we're exposed to the Gulf of Mexico moisture. We're always going to have those, if you will, the most primitive clashing of air masses.
Yeah.
And we are right in the middle of it. And so we are so prone to extreme weather right here where we live.
Yeah. So viewers who are going to be watching the special, what can they expect to see? You've covered it a little bit, but what can we expect to take from this?
All right, here's what's different about this special. I really wanted this to not be about how we've covered it, any of that. That's all been done. It's narrated by me, but most of it is in the words of everyone else. The scientists, the meteorologists, the witnesses, those that are survivors of it. It's all in their voice, because I think it's more important that, yes, I can tell you the story, but I want to be able to provide the resources to have the best people tell you that story. It's not about me. It's about
Totally.
the people that have invested their life in this group that went back and reanalyzed the tri-state tornado. I think I interviewed everyone except 2 out of that massive team. One has since passed, one was already passed, and the other one was out of town. Couldn't get to that interview, and this had to take place out in Oklahoma, so it was a long process, but it was important for me to tell it in their words, what they went and found, what survivors told them, and because you don't need a third party to tell that story. Why wouldn't you rather just have it from the source?
Yeah.
So it was important to me to go find all those sources, and that's what we did. We went to Oklahoma. We went to Murfreesboro. We went to the Storm Prediction Center. We went to the Weather Service in Paducah. We made sure that we were getting all those resources. We talked to Governor Andy Beshear and his experience. We met him in Dawson Springs, where he had family that was impacted by the storm. And of course, his dad grew up there. And my talking to him was more of, how does the state, how does response move forward? Because I mean, in just the last 2 weeks,
I know. Yeah.
significant disaster for not just us, but the entire state, the flooding disaster. And it's like, Eastern Kentucky has had consecutive
They've
events.
really been hit hard. Yeah.
And how do you sustain?
Yeah.
When does it become, sorry, small communities, you don't get help because it doesn't meet a threshold? Those are the things that I also want to find out. What is his outlook on it? Because I don't know that there's not much he can actually do, because you can't prevent the disasters.
No, you can only respond and prepare and respond.
Right. That's it. So he gives me a little take on that. And so that's part of the special as well. And I think that helps, seal everything up at the end and how we move forward, knowing that this type of historical weather is always going to be with us. We're going to see events like that again. And so it's just,
how do we prepare as a society?
Right. And how do we adapt?
Yep.
Because we can prepare, but we also have to adapt. Yeah. We have to change some of our thinking and the way that we prepare for the storms.
So we already know this is personal for you, but there was one gentleman in particular you got to interview who's, very well respected in the field, storm chaser, right?
Yep. Charles Doswell, one of the original storm chasers out in Oklahoma. He worked for National Severe Storms Laboratory for a long time, worked for the National Weather Center for a long time, has written and published almost all of the original and current modern textbooks on severe weather climatology, how severe storm dynamics, everything, because he's one of the first that decided, I'm going to look at that, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to teach it.
That is so cool.
And real renegade.
Yeah.
Cowboy hat to every conference. I knew of him growing up in going to conferences while I was in college.
He had a reputation, so to speak, in the weather community.
Got the chops going and the big cowboy hat, and if you were real lucky, he would let you wear his cowboy hat. I have a picture of that somewhere I should share, but
did you get to?
I did.
Oh, I love it. Got the full experience.
But he was one of those guys that storm chasers, they didn't have social media and all that stuff back then. They were just out there to take in. It was an environment of classroom out in
It wasn't
Midwest.
for anybody else.
No.
It was for them. Outside of the research they were doing and what they were learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a fascination.
For the thrill of it.
Absolutely. But there'd be pictures of the old time guys that went out and did that. And he's the only one at the end, flipping the bird.
Yeah.
Like just in the photo. Yeah. He was the renegade of the group. But he was always that way, and he never let anyone tell him how to do the research, what he should do. It was all just, I guess, I don't know if grassroots is the way to put it, just original.
Yeah.
And it's funny because someone like that, you just don't expect to then end your interview, which when we ended the interview, he was talking about how he just wished more women would be in forecasting.
Yeah.
He's like, I've just seen it change so much, and there are some really gifted and smart women. He's just very smart, and unfortunately, he passed away about a month and a half ago. I think we were probably his last interview.
You really didn't think he'd say yes.
Right.
But he did.
I took a chance.
Well, you took a chance, and the reason he said yes is because you also are very respected in your field, and he knew what you were doing, and he wanted to be part of that. But then you also got to document his knowledge for the world.
Yeah.
That a lot of people don't know who he is and don't know what he's contributed.
So a lot of what you'll see about him, number one, he was also part of that research team with the Tri-State Tornado. That was my main, he was my first person I wanted to go talk to because I knew who he was. and the gravity of who this person was to the meteorology field. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to get him. And so um, ended up getting that interview. But with all of these scientists that we talked to, I asked everyone to do a get to know you. Who are the characters in our story, if you will, so that you can see where these people came from, and most of them are from like Chicago, like around here. Just how they got into it and how they, what they give back
Mm-hmm.
and what oaths they take to make sure that they're saving lives, because that's what a majority of these people work for the National Weather Service, NOAA,
Mm-hmm.
Storm Prediction Center, National Severe Storms Laboratory. Those are all places that have borne the radar that we use to see now debris. I mean, when I first started my career, we didn't have that. And so to be able to say,
Wow, really?
yeah, oh yeah, when I came here to WPSD, we still hadn't gotten to that level of technology. It is amazing to see what has been developed in our lifetime, not our parents' lifetime, but our lifetime.
I wish you could see the look of shock on my face. I mean, I guess we have been in the business a little while
Our
now, but not that
our
long.
scans were
Wow.
about 14 to 15 minutes long. So you weren't getting a radar update for that long. And that was scary to me coming out of college. I was like, what?
That's
Yeah.
that is more than the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
Because as you well know, seeing what happened to your shop in Mayfield, because you had a flower shop down there that was impacted by the tornado, you've covered these events. Seconds
Right.
count. Seconds.
Minutes count. And
Minutes,
that 15 minutes is a long time.
Such a long time.
So to be able to, on each scan, be able to see where debris is, whether it's debris is happening, and the way radar does that now is it can determine between what is precipitation and what is non-precipitation. And so what is non-precipitation is interpreted as, especially where you've got rotation, is debris. Because if it's not rain and it's in that debris ball, that's why they call it debris ball, is it's an anomaly there that is non-precipitation. And so it must be debris. And when you see it lofted through different levels of the radar, that's what you were hearing the night of December 10th, is that lofted up how many tens of thousands of feet, 10,000 feet at least. And it was like, this is a monster tornado. This is why we knew it was causing devastation, because of those radar images. Imagine not having that at all. How would you warn Marshall County of a tornado emergency? How would you tell Dawson Springs? It's the middle of the night. So we say middle of the night. It was the cold season, so the sun went down early. But it was still the dark hours of the night. So it wasn't, you couldn't see it coming.
Isn't there only like one image?
There's a couple of images out there in lightning flashes.
Yes.
But that was the only way to see it. That was the only way to see it.
That is just, to me, I mean, tornadoes already are so incredibly scary, but night tornadoes, that is just very,
but if that had
very
happened 20
frightening
years
to me.
ago,
Oh, yeah.
tracking that storm would have looked very different on TV.
Whew. That really does give me goosebumps. The National Weather Service, you've already talked about them, but, it's the work of all these people that then this knowledge over time of every weather event is shared. This research, it's all funneled back into the National Weather Service, which at the end of the day is there to serve us and make sure that we bear the benefit of that research and that work.
And the good thing about the National Weather Service is that they provide professional communication about life-threatening situations. And not only that, but when it comes to fire weather, or when it comes to if there's a chemical spill, the National Weather Service is in there making sure that they have incident command over which way the wind is blowing. So they know who's going to be impacted by a chemical spill or something else going on, like a chemical release from a plant.
They do a lot more than just track storms.
24/7. It's everything environmental, from weather to climate to water resources, all of it. And so it is a 24-hour operation that takes a lot of people. I mean, think about it. Just having to monitor every single element of the weather.
And the TV folks that you see, meteorologists, while you all do a lot of your own forecasting and a lot of your own work, at the end of the day, you depend on the National Weather Service.
I mean, they
kind
provide
of
the radar.
Yeah.
They provide the radar.
Yeah.
So even though we subscribe to a company that displays the radar for in a beautiful way and the graphics in a beautiful way, all that information comes in the Weather Service. And I got to tell you that they really, their communications to even the private sector, they work really hard to make that seamless so that when there is an event going, we all have this chat that we can log into and share information so it's instant. Instead of calling in
Mhm.
the old days when I first got here, you had to call the weather service to
Yeah.
report a tornado or my viewer says this or that. Lucky if you get through, or they have time to even pick up the phone because
Mhm.
they're doing radar. They're constantly working on
And you don't
warnings.
have time to sit on the phone
Right.
because you're also trying to track.
So it's
Yeah.
to be able to get in that chat and all of us share that information instantaneously saves lives as well. And it's not just between, us and the local. The night of December 10th, you could go in there and be in the room with Memphis and in with Little Rock. So you can see what's happening in those areas instantaneously to know that this is continuing on in our direction.
Mhm. Um, you and I, before we sat down to have this conversation, you said something to me that I feel like is maybe what I know for me will likely be a takeaway from this. And one of the reasons I'm so looking forward to watching it is to see how far we've come. Is that no storm has been in vain.
No. Um
What does that mean?
our 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 communities have suffered through many catastrophic and destructive events that, like you said, just have changed the landscape. Winter Storm '09 physically
Literally.
changed
Yeah.
the landscape of what our trees look like and how long lasting that, even 10, 15 years
Yeah.
later, still having impacts from that. When you talk about um, having to rebuild a power grid because the infrastructure is just completely decimated, that changes the way you view things. To this day now, anytime there's an ice, people go get cash because they learned during the ice storm, ATMs were down. Couldn't just get cash if you wanted. Couldn't just use your credit card at the
Nope.
store, cash only. And so, or you go and you made sure you fill up with gas because if you didn't have an electronic pump or if you had electronic pumps, couldn't get gas.
Yeah.
And it was just all these lessons we've learned along the way
Mhm.
and that have helped shape some of
Preparedness.
the preparedness that
Mhm.
helped shape some of the forecasting. So even though, you know, nearly 700 people lost their lives in southern Illinois, now we say tornado in a forecast.
And maybe, moving forward, um, hopefully the lesson here is that not only has no storm been in vain, but our efforts after those storms, during and after those storms, have not been in vain and should not be taken for granted. We should
Right.
continue to push for research, for understanding,
Yeah.
for,
We've
faster
got
and better models and
the end of the special will be also focused on what is to come.
yeah.
And there is a lot of what happened during the Mayfield tornado that is being done in test beds
Mm,
to further enhance how we warn people. So, we went from warning an entire county to a polygon of a county. Now it's going to be a probability type of warning. And we're going to see
mm,
that because it's rapid. Um, it it's rapidly updated by computer model by what's happening on the radar. So you have to imagine these supercomputers that are doing this instantaneously to put out the best warning information. And it's not perfect. I mean, there's
no.
no perfect uh, engine out there. We
Mm-mm.
wouldn't have jobs. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
so, but it gives you the best chance of surviving a Mayfield
Yeah.
Dawson Springs tornado. It
Yeah.
gives you the best chance of surviving a flash flooding event that has wiped out the road down the street from where you normally drive. Like,
Mhm.
those are the things that you'll see coming out. There are still things that we have to do that are archaic around here.
Mhm.
There are things like we warn an entire county with storm sirens when it's
Wow.
only
Yeah.
impacting a very small portion of the county. Those are things that it's we got to just do it at this
Yeah.
point because you
Especially
don't want people to be complacent.
that's what I was going to say. To me, it's like you worry about the complacency and taking for granted this technology that we have, and then I hear the siren and nothing happens.
See, these sirens can be retrofitted with
Yeah.
technology that can go off if they're in a polygon.
Yeah.
That's the very minimum that is
Yeah.
needed in those areas because what you're doing is those nursing facilities, hospitals, when they hear a tornado warning, they have to go in a special procedure, move people to interior rooms, including people that are probably on oxygen, on,
Major
dialysis, all of these
impact.
things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're alerting the entire
Yeah.
county, this happens in some of our counties in the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You alert an entire university that there's a tornado when there isn't. It's not impacting a university. So and I understand the thinking of, well, we're doing it just to be safe, but we can do better than that now.
That's the point. We can do
Right.
better than that now. Yeah.
We can do better than that now.
Uh-huh.
How do we find funding for that, though? That's going to be the other issue for small towns like here. And so it's how do you mitigate those changes in such an environment where we need it most here? So those are the things we have to look forward to. And those are the questions that, well, I don't know if we have the answers right now.
But you're posing them.
Right.
Which is the point of this special, is to get
Yes.
everybody thinking about this, to look at what we've done and how far we've come, and then to start thinking. I mean, we already are, but start thinking even more seriously.
Because we know what our tornado safety plans are. We know all that stuff.
Yes.
In our back of our minds, we know what we have to do.
Yeah.
But there's still more we have to do.
A Century of Storms airs Wednesday, March 12th at 7 p.m. Central Time on WPSD Local 6. It will also be available online after the conclusion of the premiere. You can check out a special insert in the Paducah Sun today. It's everything you and your family need to know to prepare for extreme weather, as March is Severe Weather Preparedness Month.
This little preparedness guide that's going in the newspaper, we're trying to get some kid-related activities in it as well, so that there's a whole bunch of things. But do it together. Do it together. And as I always promote, give your kids a role in severe weather safety at home. If they had just collect the blankets or make sure that they've got the helmets for when they have to go take shelter, they feel more in control of the situation. And that goes a long way in them not being scared forever of an event.
I want to take a moment to recognize the people powering the Crossroads Suncast as we move through our first season. The show only comes together through the efforts of assignment manager Charity Blanton, who makes the logistics happen. The interview for this episode was recorded by photojournalist Ethan Patterson. The script for this episode, edited by senior executive producer Morgan Regal. He's also EP on A Century of Storms. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Jennifer Rukavina for joining us. Thanks to Jennifer Horbelt for conducting the interview. And thanks to the team that makes the show happen.